welcome back to another episode here with Delaware Valley Contractors Insurance. This video today, we are going to talk about one of the most basic insurance coverages that every contractor needs and presumably every single contractor has. It's something that can get overlooked sometimes as almost a way of making sure you're checking a box on a certificate. But general liability insurance is one of the most important parts of your insurance program, and it is really that primary base for the coverages that you carry to cover what your work does. So we're going to talk about each different part of the coverage, what it does, what it's designed to cover your business for, and some other things to consider when reviewing your general liability insurance. So to get started in as simple way as possible, general liability coverage is protection for your business in the event that there is any bodily harm or property damage caused by you or your employees within the scope of your operations. So depending on the type of business that you are in, this could show itself in a handful of different ways. If we think about contractors who are entering people's homes, doing work in people's homes, let's just say it's a countertop install contractor and you're bringing in a countertop to install into somebody's kitchen and you drop that countertop onto the floors, causing damage to the floors. That could be an example of property damage as far as your general liability is concerned. Okay? Another example of that would be if you are completing any type of work, whether it be at a commercial site or at somebody's home, and as a result of the installation you're doing or the repairs that you're doing, you cause damage to the home, to the business, to the site in which you're working at that was not intended, was not necessary, and wasn't in the scope of what you were contracted to do. That's the property damage piece. The second part of it is bodily injury. So if you are on a job site and as part of your operation, say you're a site contractor and you are digging and maybe you don't mark off the area that you're digging, somebody slips, falls into wherever you're working and they get injured as a result of it. That's another simple case on the bodily injury side. Another example there would be if you're doing work, let's say you're an electrician, you're wiring up a home, you wire it up, you have a few loose connections or one loose connection, and as a result of that, it leads to a fire, right? Now we're talking about property damage and potential bodily injury that could occur as a result of the work that your business is doing, okay? So really simple. If there's one thing you remember is that general liability is coverage for property damage and or bodily injury as a result of the work that you are doing within the scope of your jobs, okay? This is separate from any automobile liability, so car accidents, things like that. It also doesn't cover your employees. They're not part of that general liability coverage. That would fall under your workers' compensation. This coverage is not something that anybody is ever missing, right? Very simply, you cannot work without having this coverage. And there's not a whole lot of nuance to the limits. 90% of the time, general liability policies are written on a $1 million per occurrence, $2 million per aggregate limit. And essentially all that means is that your per occurrence limit is what is the limit of insurance that you have in any one occurrence, meaning one property damage claim, one bodily injury claim. You have up to usually $1 million. The $2 million aggregate, what that means is that you can have up to 2 separate $1 million claims in a given year, okay? Some variations you may see of this would be policies that are written with a $1 million per occurrence, $3 million aggregate, essentially saying that you could have up to 3 separate $1 million claims on the year. You may also see some policies that are written on a $2 million per occurrence, $4 million aggregate limit, meaning you could have $2 million of coverage for one incident, up to $4 million on the year. Okay, smaller contractors, you may opt for less, but honestly, industry standard, the bare minimum here is $1 million per occurrence. Okay, there are some other pieces that I think are worth mentioning just to kind of clear the air especially as it relates to contractors, if you look at your certificate of insurance or your policy, you're going to see in there coverage for personal and advertising injury. And essentially all that means is that if you get accused for slander, libel, copyright issues, things like that, it's not necessarily that relevant to construction businesses. So that's something that you don't need to get overly concerned about, but you should know what it is and why it's important, okay? The last piece I want to touch on general liability insurance as far as the basics go is how general liability is rated and why it's important for contractors to understand this. It's rated depending on the carrier you're with. It could be rated on a number of things. Most commonly used for contractors is your total payroll. So the total payroll for any of your field employees, not including office, and then owners are capped at a certain amount depending on the carrier and the state, okay? The second one that's often used is your gross sales, meaning the gross annual revenue for your business, okay? And then the third one, which is a little bit less common, but we do still see, is them rating off of your number of employees that you have in the field, okay? Your number of techs, your number of helpers, whatever that may be. It's important to pay close attention to this rating, how it's being used and applied to your business, because it's a huge determinant of your overall cost. And we'll get into this in later episodes, but the payroll and gross sales, if that's how your liability is being rated, which 90% of you watching this video it will be, it's important to pay attention to make sure that you're staying on top of that throughout the year so that you can avoid any big audit issues, especially for contractors who use subcontractors a lot. If you don't have proper documentation, certificates of insurance on file, you could be looking at a pretty big audit for your general liability if you don't have all the necessary things in place from your subcontractors. Because if you don't, the carrier is going to assume they didn't have insurance and they're going to charge you as if those were your employees, that was your payroll, and that was your gross revenue, okay? So really high level, just the goal today, hopefully you have a basic understanding of what your general liability coverage is, why it's important, and some of the factors to consider when looking at it. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like this video, share it with somebody else, and be sure to subscribe so that you can learn more about general liability when we dig further into this topic.